And today we're going to talk about planes, trains, and automobiles, or what I call the Internet of Deadly Things. And we'll progress here. Or when worlds collide. So I've got to give this disclaimer. This presentation, it's a work of in progress. It comes from some earlier work I did, which was called Hiding from Robots. The opinions expressed by myself in this presentation are mine solely and do not represent those of my employer. A little about myself. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, and I've had many roles in information security. I started out as a hacker, and then I rebranded as a researcher because that's so much more politically correct. Consultant, policy scribe, but really what I'm doing today is a trusted advisor, part-time packet master, or herder of cats. So anybody that runs projects across matrix organizations knows what I'm talking about there, really managing the different stakeholders. So today we're really going to talk about cyber physical systems, and I know a lot of people get down on using the term cyber. It's actually a pretty good drinking game, depending on which conference you're going to. But in the cyber here, we're really referring to the domain of information technology, zeros and ones, if you will. On the physical side, we're concerned with atoms, touch, tangible things that you can do, and they're systems. And whenever you hear somebody referred to as a cyber physical systems, in fact, those are typically systems of systems. And why this is interesting is anytime that you have two completely different domains that start to come together, you'll hear people refer to innovation and all these awesome things that can happen. But the other side of that is all the bad things that can happen. And because these two domains, while they're both, some people could argue that information technology is a young science, but it's a science nevertheless. It's much newer than physical engineering practices. And so, as our friend George Costanza, Jerry, worlds are colliding, and we need to be aware of the implications of those worlds colliding. Thank you. So at the center of all of these systems, I mean, the reason we do any of these pursuits should be the beneficiary, that humans matter. And you'll hear me talk about humans mattering a lot, not just because of in this practice, but as far as human analysts goes. But, you know, we build things to benefit humans, and maybe that is initially motivated by creating wealth of some kind. Your adversaries might want to deny you of that benefit. Likewise, maybe should be first, is the health, and then well-being, peace of mind, happiness. So hopefully the intent of all the people out there bringing these Internet of weird, deadly things together have the right motivation. But likewise, you might have an adversary that wants to deny you of any of those things. Now, I was pretty comfortable when I started this research a couple years ago, before I even really knew I was doing it, and I was really focused on these two domains. So when we talk about cyber or information security, we're talking security, right? We're going to keep those systems secure, protect those assets. When you talk to engineers that work in, say, the automobile industry, safety is their term. Interestingly enough, Germans do not have different words for these two. We maybe learned something from them. So I actually had an opportunity to present some of this to Vinton Cerf. Somebody missed an appointment. I was happened to be there and it was a really weird first 5 minutes, well, why are you here and who are you? But I started explaining what I was doing with the different domains. He's nodding his head. And I said, yeah, what do you think? And he's like, good stuff, but grasshopper, you forgot one thing, privacy. And so I've added this third pillar because that's absolutely correct. These, two domains, if the humans are the beneficiary, then we can also be damaged if we don't have privacy. And there's, I think, an expectation, not necessarily the right expectation, that we do have privacy in some of our systems. And we'll talk specifically to that. So, how do we bring all those things together and make it human-friendly, or something that we could talk to our grandmother about and give her some useful information? Well, I think it's danger, because what we're really trying to avoid here is, dangerous activity or dangerous things that could hurt us. So I'll come back to this concept of danger here in a little while. So what's our wicked business problem or wicked problems? Here's an IDC infographic that's pretty good. I mean, right now there's about 7.5 billion humans in the world. By 2050, there's going to be 9 billion, and in 2100, projecting out to be something in the neighborhood of 11 billion. As you can see, by 2020, under embedded and intelligent systems, not really sure what intelligent systems mean, but they're going to be 25 million plus. So we're pretty much outnumbered already. And these would be embedded systems that IoT. A lot of these systems are cyber-physical systems we'll think of as manufacturing networks, possibly SCADA, associated with critical infrastructure. And there's some characteristics about these systems. Anybody have a characteristic that irks them about say a manufacturing network or SCADA or a vehicle, which I call SCADA on wheels? Patch cycles. What happens if you patch a system? Maybe you void a warranty. There's very little downtime. With the exception of what we're seeing, Tesla was the first, I think, automobile company that was built to do over-the-air updates. And we now know most of our hardware is software. A lot of the other manufacturers don't have that ability. And it's not the same as patching a phone, right? Do you want to brick your Buick? So there's issues there. Also, this IDC was really talking about how much revenue to be made because it was a kind of a business, but also the amount of data that's being collected. And of course, there's going to be somebody's private information or sensitive information in there. So this isn't a future problem, it's a now problem, and we really need to start considering it, or at least to be what I'll call cyber savvy or safety savvy consumer. So what's a reasonable response for reasonable humans to do in this case? It's probably not to go, move into a Ted Kaczynski shack and it's here. You got to participate. You got to engage. So really looking at a way to have this dialogue between those different domains. So maybe if we could create what I call a cross-domain taxonomy, so that when we're talking about things, we're using the same language, the same verbiage. I'm big. Anybody who knows some of my previous research, where do we do capture the flag variations or packet wars, cyber sport, very interested in doing modeling for training and assessment purposes. And I think with as much big compute and inexpensive compute that's out there, I really would like to see this part of our research move forward in trying to automate the modeling of some of these systems. We might also want to establish known theoretical attack surfaces for these various systems. Again, this can, we do this type of work every day in information security. They have in engineering disciplines. They also do extensive testing, and so don't necessarily think of things as an attack surface as much as safety. Because this suggests a active adversary where they're just worrying about physics and human lives. We can also by stakeholder, and this is important because sometimes you'll bore stakeholders or people that have an interest if you're not speaking to them about things they care about. So when we talk about the threats, or they should be relevant, we could create a threat catalog. And these should be realistic, not just relevant, but realistic. So yes, a meteor could hit us right now as we're in this room, and we'd be wiped off the face of the earth. But would you really insure yourself for meteor attack? Probably not. Of course, maybe you do. I don't see any tinfoil hats out there, which I own, by the way. And we want to understand, okay, if we got this threat catalog, the only thing that's a relevant threat catalog is if there is a control affinity. Is there a countermeasure? I'm going to use the term fail-safe, so we'll talk about this. So if there is really something that we could do about that threat, then it makes sense to actually have these control affinities in place. And then, of course, rinse and repeat. And these life cycle management, until you decommission them, they're still there. And understanding which systems of systems and the system components are important too. Everybody's familiar with the challenges with supply chain security, right? Try to go buy backups of some even surface mount stuff. You buy them in bulk. Besides the quality control issues, you'll find they're being manufactured from different places. One of the things, as a researcher, you were talking about fries. We don't have those in Dayton, but we do have Best Buys, and I went around buying some of the power over the IEEE 1911 stuff that allows you to use the home wiring for land bridging. And I bought a whole bunch of them. They're all the same models. Pop them open, you look, they're all using different manufacturer on the chipset. So it's great that you would have components, but why would you trust that component to either be quality or possibly not have some type of backdoor or out-of-bounds signaling capability? And I know this, my background, I was a civil servant in the Cold War, and so I have all that paranoia, and it's great because it's all come back, and all those lessons learned from a long time ago are now applicable. So let's talk a little bit about prior art. Obviously, I'm not the first one out here talking about this. Is anybody familiar with the Industrial Internet Consortium? Really? Okay. Not just kidding. This is actually a bunch of vendors. AT&T, Cisco, Intel, GE, and IBM gotten together, and they've actually printed a pretty good reference architecture, if you will, and they talk about a lot of these elements. They talk about stakeholders. They're talking about looking at the different elements from different perspectives. Really good stuff, but kind of marketing, not applicable in your day-to-day business. But they've got a good dialogue. I'd suggest just, Google them and you can pull down some of their papers. But their motivation is really to drive people to that 2020, so we're getting those numbers out there because they believe very strongly they're going to monetize the Internet of Things. How about these guys? I Am the Cavalry. Yep, okay. So these guys are really awesome. Now, they're at the other end of the spectrum. They're not really putting out these mandates and technical specs and everything. What they're trying to do is talk to grandma, talk to people that are not necessarily security professionals, to educate them and make them savvy consumers. Their first outing was around, it's all about the Internet of Dangerous Things, Deadly Things, connected cars. So they put out something that was human-friendly, something that an analogy that we would understand, the 5-star safety program, right? And they put some suggestions, and that was a call to the industry, call to consumers, but things like the one thing that they asked for was a white box. Anybody know what the white box is? So you have a black box in a plane, right? And they're always looking for the black box but they had a concept. They want that telemetry that's in the vehicle to be open to the owner. And as you know, hopefully you're aware that you don't really own the rights to any of the software, the logs in that vehicle. And there's a lot of things that people are doing out there, in regards to collecting CAN bus data and how that's being used to give you a break on your insurance. But has anybody ever heard of somebody getting a break on their insurance because they used one of those onboard diagnostic dongles? Yeah, I don't think that's the way it works, but hey. And they also have the Hippocratic Oath that they're now talking about implanted and connected medical devices. So I really like the approach they're taking. It's educational, getting people to have this dialogue. It's not very prescriptive, and it's not necessarily something that you can use as either an engineering safety professional or a cybersecurity professional. NIST, yes. So anybody sit on any of the public working groups with NIST? Yes, it is those limited hours that you might have to do some things. It's costly. I've sat on 2 of them, the energy sector and most recently the cyber physical working group, and it is governance in action. And I've been on meetings where we've argued about the placement of a comma, and I swear to you that's the fact. But eventually they do come out with some good stuff. And Again, not super practical. It will be, I think, down the road a great way to look at the maturity of a specific industry, or maturity of a player in that, maybe the effectiveness, and it's very comprehensive. They just released, like 2 weeks ago, their CPS framework. And the reason I'm sharing this, I really like this diagram. This was the one thing that kept me going back to the meetings because we were still developing it. And this is like the 7th incarnation. But if you look at this, you've got your human there, so the beneficiary, but those are also operators because we're going to be working with those systems. You've got this dotted line that says, okay, the cyber and the physical, there's a D mark there, even though they're entrenched, and that your cyber at some point is atoms, right? And then there's this decision, action, state. This is really cool because you might only care about systems, especially embedded systems or SCADA systems where they don't have a lot of processor. You may only be interested, and there's a lot of data to process, and there might not be very effective or reliable communication systems. So maybe I'm only interested in state change. And if I have a whole bunch of these sensors all around, I can start to infer things by different state changes, like metadata. You've got this concept of the system of systems. Then you can drill down to see a system, and within that system, there's individual devices. So again, it's a huge document. It's just been released, but not too bad to get a taste for it. And they have some pretty good diagrams in there. All right. Well, none of these were actually fit for purpose for what I was doing, because what I'm trying to do, typically in my job, is to give some kind of decision support. I'm going to tell you, relative to these two designs, one design is more safe and secure than the other design. Because I'm trying to get some kind of decision that I have to be able to make with some kind of science behind it or a repeatable process, but I'm not going to have all the data because you're just not going to be able to do it, and especially when you're having to answer questions in a very constrained time frame. So this could also act as a way for us to have that cross-domain taxonomy. So at least when we're talking to people, we might not have to know the jargon. And the work that I did with connected car and smart grid, I started to realize these systems are all basically the same. They use different terminologies, but at the end of the day, there are these cyber physical system primitives, and that's kind of what I want to present, which is my current research. So here we have our human elements, and those are the beneficiaries. Humans can also be operators. Humans can also be targets, and in my cyber simulation work that I've done, I go into a lot about the different types of human players. Here we have a single function automaton, so that's a process within the NIST framework. You might consider this as a device or capability, again, depending, but there's going to be one of these elements there. We then can add sensors. So this is how, in theory, these automaton actually can sense their environment, and they can sense state change, and maybe that is good for a human to understand if there's a state change. So a thermistor would be a type of sensor. A camera would be a type of sensor. Listening devices. Now that this device or this automaton has some information it wants to communicate, we give it some ability to do that, and of course there's whole subdomains within information security about communication protocols. In most of these cyber physical systems, they're not using TCP/IP. A lot of serial protocols anymore. Vehicles use CAN bus protocols. Anybody work in any manufacturing networks with PLCs? Okay. Now there are also TCP/IP, and most of these systems, if you read their security, they talk about the reason they base all their security on isolation. So your manufacturing networks were never meant to be connected to external networks. The power grid was never meant to be connected to any other networks. And the reason that you'll see now a lot of these networks, they have gateways, communication gateways in there. Anybody know why that's happening? Dashboards for executives, right? Or remote management, because humans matter, but humans are expensive. So we want to do everything automated remotely. So yes, and you could, just understanding a communication protocol that has been forgotten or other people don't know will give you, a much, you can apply that and actually increase your value or worth in any kind of projects. And then, of course, here's the biggie, actuators. These are things that move, that can make and can impact the physical world. We have a valve here which could move clean water to dirty water, or some other kind of action. Okay, that makes sense? Very simple primitives. You can apply that to any cyber-physical system, and then you're at that very, very high level. I've also got some primitives that I want to talk about, which are danger drivers. So these are things that when we start to assess a system, we should look at and maybe start to apply some logic or some quantitative measure as to how one system might be more dangerous than another system. So an effector. Now, effector and actuators, sometimes people get those confused, but an effector is the ability to affect change, affect state change in a system or systems of systems. So buying a ticket in one respect in the domain of the human process domain, before I go through a turnstile at a subway, that ticket is an effector. Now I have the capability. I exercise the effector by scanning it or putting it into the barcode reader, and then I can go through the gate which has the actuator, or the lock that releases the actuator that lets me go through. So the idea would be here, if we have a lot of effectors, or we don't know what our effectors are, if we don't have a census of effectors, we won't know what the danger we won't know what the danger level is relative to the other systems. That would not be good. So any of these things that you're blind to, or you don't have an understanding of how they interact, that lack of knowledge is going to suggest that you have a dangerous situation. And then when we put all those single function automaton together, we get automata. That is a great movie, by the way, but I can never pronounce it. But we put those, that's the devices that make up the systems of systems. We put those together. We then would have more sensors, sensor packs. So the idea would be, if I have a whole bunch, this is really single function automaton. That means I have more code. So the more code I have, and the more interaction with code, that my attack surface might get bigger. The way they interact with each other might not be as predictable as I would like. So we might have danger. Sensors, sensor packs, they're going to come in more sensors. And because a lot of these sensors are dependent on external stimuli, right, they can be easily confused. So we could think of things like, GPS, right? GPS can be spoofed, correct? We know there's two types of GPS, one for all us schmoes and one for precision-guided missiles and whatnot. But it's just, it's RF domain, so that can be impacted. How would you maybe blind sensors? Laser beams, if they're visual sensors, and you can put white noise in to impact auditory sensors. So the more sensors you have, potential bigger the attack surface, and if you're making decisions that impact people's safety based on those sensors, you really better be able to trust them. And then we have operators. So in this case, maybe it's a human operator who's a friendly, but they can go rogue. We could also have artificial intelligence or automated operators, which is something to consider. So, and these in one respect are effectors also. We have the actuator, which is where things start to really get happen in the real world, and some of those actuator types provide mobility. So a stationary cyber-physical system might be inherently more secure than a mobile system, or maybe not. And then we actually have weapons. So you can weaponize actuators. You can use mobility as a weapon, right? We could drive cars or fly planes into things. But we can actually load them up with weapons too. So if you would think that you actually have something designed to hurt people as part of your system, again, it might be inherently more dangerous than some of the other capabilities that are afforded that system just because they have mobility or a swinging saw blade. Levels of autonomy. So if a system is fully autonomous, if you've modeled it correctly in theory, it is going to work in a very specific way and you can understand it. You might want your human operators to have autonomy. This is something I've been working on with Sergey Bratis about the power of discretion and, of course, sphere of influence. Let's talk about sphere of influence and range of motion. So, range of motion. If I have a saw blade, a buzz saw, for some reason in my childhood, those were Mach 5, the blades. And they go like this. They work, in one plane. Is that a more dangerous system than one that can go in two planes or 360 degrees? So it becomes relative danger index. And then sphere of influence can be applied to a lot of these different. The sphere of influence is operators. So if you have a team lead, one team leader has more sphere of influence over the other teams. Sphere of influence can also be permissions from within the software. And it's, again, a generic term that could be applied in a lot of different ways. And then we have capacity. So capacity could be how far can the system of systems go on a single charge or a gallon of gasoline. It can also be what's the capacity of the weapon systems or the battery levels. And so the more capacity that a system has, in theory, the more dangerous it would be to another system than another system. So we're not going to be doom and gloom. So we have these systems. They're dangerous. How do we generate confidence characteristics? Now, confidence is derived from a combination of control and trust. And in the old days, when you controlled everything in your environment, you didn't have so much trust. But now with supply chain and the, we'll call it journey to the cloud, where everybody is having to trust each other and there's all these interdependencies, we really should be able to look for confidence characteristics. So, ironically or not, the same thing that might create more danger for us in the attack zone with sensors that can be blinded or made deaf or spoofed, we have sensors as a confidence characteristics. If I'm making my decision based on a sensor array, all that have some type of physical security on them, I'll see an anomaly. Minority Report might come to mind. Right, I have the three psychics. They have, two of them have to agree, or they all three agree and one doesn't. Something's up. I don't know if it's malicious, but something that might require a human to look at. This level of autonomy, this is comes in when we start talking about discretion. So the level of autonomy would, is there a human override? Is there an operator override? Is there any way that you can actually change the behavior when you learn something new? Or is it fully autonomous? And I have a little bit of a discussion towards the end when we talk about autonomous weapon systems. And then the maturity. And this is more the maturity of the control or maturity of the discipline. So a very mature industry that is often cited when we were talking about connected car insecurity was the aviation industry. And kind of the way that they have checks and balances, the whole concept of a checklist, maybe manual overrides for systems. And it's often cited that, it's safer to walk, fly in a plane than, walk across the street or drive in a car and things of that nature. So those industries are domain. Are they mature? Because in theory, if they're mature and they've been doing this for a while, that would give you a reason to believe or a trustworthiness or have confidence that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. This concept of discretion, really when we started this research with Sergey and myself, he wrote this great paper about the lack of discretion in certain industries, that in healthcare, that's been taken away from the doctor, and wouldn't you want to have discretion in certain industries, but possibly discretions in judges might be a good thing. So 3 strikes, you're out. That removes the discretion. And, I don't come down on it one way or the other, but I think it's very important. And we're seeing more and more discretion taken away from humans and put into, autonomous systems, when would we want discretion? And I've got some examples here in a minute. Persistence. Because a lot of these systems are the embedded systems, the value of persistence might be when we reboot it, when it comes up, when it does a state change, can we be confident that it's going to go back to the previous state? And if we have a way to detect if something isn't in that persistent state, that might be a way to detect anomalous activity or malicious activity. Countermeasures. Okay, this kind of goes back to our threat catalog and control affinities. So for potential bad things, how many countermeasures are there? How many of how big is that threat catalog? Have the engineers and the programmers done their job to address at least the known bad things that can happen? Fail safes. Okay, so this is basically the off plug. This is the switch that allows a human to come in and turn something off. And 2 years ago, we were doing a Packet Wars scenario that was about connected car. And the scenario was a vehicle gets compromised with a piece of malware from an electrical vehicle charging station. They in turn spread it through a sensor network to other vehicles, and once it gets critical mass, there's no way to turn it off because the resiliency in the mesh-like sensor network that's being created between vehicles, whether we realize it or not, made it very resilient. And so I feel very strongly that we need physical fail-safes, a way to unplug something. Today we can do that. If you see a bunch of data being exfiltrated, assuming that you can move fast enough or you know where it's plugged in the cloud, or you have a SLA that allows you to push a button, those fail-safes are starting to disappear. And in fact, we've built so much resiliency in the system, would you know how to unplug a service that's highly available in a global connected world? I don't know. And then you might want to kinetic capability. This is one step up, and this is typically nation state. So yeah, if you're doing something, we don't know how to unplug it, we can just blow it up. This is not available to most of us. The other bits that would be adding here are the privacy and the idea of secrets. So shared secrets are a very bad thing. We still don't have anything to replace passwords, and a lot of key material. If you look at people who are doing really good research in defeating systems that have FIPS certification and are using all the best technology, very rarely does anybody implement secrets or crypto correctly. So they're all vulnerable. And remember, these are going to be groups of systems or systems of systems. And so it's likely that there may be in a single component no known vulnerabilities, maybe a fairly secure system, but when it starts to interact, just because you have two secure elements and you put them together, that doesn't give you twice the security. It actually creates a different touch points. And that's why I believe modeling is so important. I don't see any of that activity going on right now for most of these systems as they interact with other systems. And we'll talk about that again briefly. So planes, we'll start getting into some of the specifics of how to apply this to the different cyber-physical systems. So planes have critical systems. These are the critical physical systems that allow them to, put tonnage up in the air. Their avionics, the thrust for the jets, all the different airline, retracting the gears and all that. Those are important for that functionality to do it safely. We then have to deal with other planes. So they're in the air. We've got this elaborate system of air traffic controls, which actually do a pretty good job of keeping the air safe, and they're talking to each other. And as long as people play by the rules, it should be okay. And then, of course, we have this in the modern age. Malaysia Airlines Flight 730 or 370 went missing. I didn't really think that would be possible in a modern world, right? We were, constantly being surveilled, but it did happen. And that would be interesting post-mortem. We probably won't get the real deal on that for many years, and because they do a very thorough job of understanding what happened. Postmortems were very a good thing to do, but it's probably not going to be too interesting to us. But we should look at this, because whatever happened there, the systems that we depend on for safety and security somehow failed us, and that could have been an effector, that could have been a human involved in that. It could have been a hardware failure, but because of the system of systems, we might not, understand, and thereby be able to predict and make sure it doesn't happen again. I also was going to put something about passengers, because humans matter and stuff. And I had a crash flight from 1972 where the rugby players ended up eating some of their dead friends, but I didn't think that would be appropriate. So, deadly things, right? Humans. In trains, we have, again, all these critical systems to give the propulsion to actually have it execute its functionality. There are some safety sensors in here that allow us to know if we're going too fast, and all these controls, wonderful critical systems. We then have these automated train protection systems, and notice they require external network connectivity so that they can warn the people down the tracks that something's amiss. Other interesting things, now, they're not sharing the air like our planes are, but they're sharing a railroad system. And because there isn't just, right, we got rid of the monopolies, there's not just one train system out there, or train company, so they have to be able to talk across those boundaries between different stakeholders. And we constantly hear, I think this is something we hear about, every 2 months or so, a train going mad. Human operator falling asleep, and when trains do collide with each other, given their kinetic capability, it's pretty bad. Now, they're not going to affect too much outside of their sphere of influence is limited to those tracks and maybe a few hundred feet, unless they're carrying some type of cargo, and we have a spill of some kind of dangerous chemical. The danger index on this might go up. And they can have a lot of capacity to hurt humans in the form of passengers. And speaking of humans, we're now putting all sorts of nice amenities in all of these systems, because you have to have your Wi-Fi when you're on the train, and you want to have your news. And so they all are basically adding to their attack surface with wireless amenities and things like that. However, traveling in Europe on the RELIS, you can get Wi-Fi and do a lot of work, and it's actually less than sometimes than going through security in the airports. So this is not a bad mode of transportation, especially with those amenities. But when something bad happens, it can be catastrophic. On the automobile side, everybody's been following this. I think this is some of the most published, cool, sexy stuff, and you have a vehicle yourself, so it might be more relevant to you. This is Harman's got a little connected car security. They show essentially a lot of the attack surface. So ECUs are the processors, and vehicles in many cases, have more different systems than your home network, maybe some small enterprises even. And they are connected on typically a CAN bus. And one of the ways to really understand relative danger index is does the infotainment system, ECUs, share a bus with the critical systems like braking or acceleration? If they have segmented that from an architecture standpoint, it might be more secure than something with a flatter bus. And so just counting those might be a good thing. Here's another external points for the attack surface. How close do you have to be to do something to the tire pressure monitors? And a lot of people are like, oh, that's ridiculous. Well, if there's low tire pressure and you hack the system to say that it looks good, that was fundamentally what happened in Stuxnet, right? So the operators are operating what they think is a tolerable zone, but in reality their sensors couldn't be trusted, and that cost them 6 months and how many millions of dollars in lost productivity when the centrifuges failed. I really recommend, does anybody know Craig Smith? Awesome guy. He's not in Ohio anymore, which makes me sad, but this is his second revision of the Car Hacker Handbook. The original one is from 2014 and is published under Creative Commons, so go up there and download the PDF. This one, they sell it on Amazon. Really, really good book, and it's a great way if you want to learn about car hacking and just, be aware. And I'll tell you, people who might not consider themselves hackers who are the car modders. So the modding scene and performance tuning on vehicles, that's where a lot of the stuff that Craig learned came from, that sub-community that would more maybe engineering tool heads, but they had to learn how to hack their firmware to get the carburetor to do what they wanted it to, the injectors to do what they wanted to do. So check it out. It's a good book. So we've got those systems. We don't even need to have malicious actors to create killer robots. So this is a version of Sophie's Choice, and I know the car manufacturers are looking at this, but what you don't see in this picture, what we have is two people pushing babies, right? The only thing would be better would be kittens, and the car is going to have to do something. Now, most people say, stop. Well, let's say you're going at 70 miles an hour, and I don't know why these women are out here with their babies on the highway at 70 miles an hour, and you have a Freightliner bearing down on you. Somebody dies in this situation. And in the near future, that decision probably will be more around how sensors and autonomous systems work together than any human intervention. And I don't know who wins. It depends, maybe actuary tables, insurance companies. Is this a rental car? Do I actually own it? I would suggest you start reading your EULAs and look for this scenario at some point, because they'll make a decision either to stop, which will get you rear-ended by the semi behind you, veer left, kill this person, maybe because they could do a quick lookup and somehow value their life as less than this one. She doesn't have a lawyer. This one's married to a lawyer. I don't know. I do the same scenario with a convertible full of co-eds and a school bus on the other side. So I'm working with new slides. Again, single function automaton, do something. We give it a sensor. We give it the ability to communicate, give it an actuator that can allow it to move, and then have an operator or a beneficiary. If any of those systems can be compromised, you might have a killer robot on your hands. And this is not science fiction. I'll blow this one up. Did anybody hear about the Volkswagen contractor that got killed by a manufacturing robot? They were installing it. The robot basically picked them up and pinned them against a piece of metal, very ugly. And that was the actual contractor was the contractor for installing the robot. So had somehow missed one of the safety parameters, had walked in when somebody else was doing a test, and they died. Terrible tragedy. But more of that will happen. We'll see it. Here is Daimler's. Have you guys seen this? The Freightliner. It's called Inspiration Truck. It's a fully autonomous vehicle, and it's got a lot of cargo. It's it's very aerodynamic, and there's a lot of reasons that you might want autonomous truck drivers. Anybody think of one besides leering at your girlfriends, or possibly falling asleep, because that apparently happens a lot. Fall asleep. However, I keep going back to that Stephen King movie, Maximum Overdrive, and it seems like they were separated at birth. So, I don't know. That's a lot of tonnage going at high speed. Could be a lot of force, kinetic force. And if you only would have to take control of a few trucks on the road to do, if you were, a motivated adversary, could be very bad things. Or even forget running things into, just stopping. What would happen if every third car stopped simultaneously on the highways everywhere in the United States? Game over, right? Because there won't be any way to get the dead and injured people to hospitals and Armageddon. Autonomous and semi-autonomous weapon systems. Okay, this is a kind of a big one. This shows our role in the future. Humans can actually be the operator. So we can fly by wire. We have a guy on the ground. He shoots his laser at the target. We bring it in. We fly it in to that. That really doesn't happen anymore. It's pretty much all autonomous with essentially humans being the moral agent. So they do the kill decision. They say, okay, yes, we have formal confirmation that that's the target, light it up, and give the kill order. And then here that fail-safe. So humans as a fail-safe or moral agent. Those are the two I like the most right now because we haven't really been talking about morals or ethics very much in the maybe responsible disclosure, but in the cyber domain, not so much, and maybe not so much in the engineering domain also. I'm trying to think of a system that has a fail-safe. Public buses. Well, no, they don't have a fail-safe. They have a bell that you ring that you want to leave. Old train movies. There used to be a place you could break it and it would stop the train. I wonder if that still works. And don't take my word for it. There's an organization called the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots. Have you heard of this? Check them out. They actually are very reasonable and they don't sound like fanatics when they talk about it. And in fact, there's other people out there that have a lot of good reputation this one is pretty good because he actually calls artificial intelligence, which is what you're going to need for an autonomous system at some point, especially if they're weapon systems that have to attack each other, summoning the demon. And we have one here from Stephen Hawking. The development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. But maybe we evolve into something better. And this one I love. Machines will view us as an unpredictable and dangerous species. We'll make nice pets. All right, so what's funky fresh? What's up next? I've got a white paper. So I take all this kind of primitives and put it together. And I've got a white paper to be coming out next month. I'm getting it reviewed by some pretty interesting folks that have already provided some good feedback. With this, I'm going to make it'll be available. We'll get it out there, and we really want to start trying to put this into practice with some other tools, and those will be the tools and use cases. So I've been using something called a rapid risk assessment. If you're doing any risk assessment right now, it's very similar to what you're doing, except we can do it much quicker, and it's not a full assessment. It's really to answer a single question. How much more secure against our current threat catalog are hard tokens versus soft tokens, something like that. Because then it lets you make a real business decision. There certainly is a place to do full risk assessments, just as there's a place for the NIST framework. But in my day-to-day job, when we're having to make decisions quickly and people expect you to have a position, this helps me, whether I expose this work to them or not, helps me understand the current state. And a lot of times when something changes, when you have a state change or something significant, one of your assumptions change, you can go back and run through this and very quickly find out where your flawed logic, or the assumption that got you owned is. There's another thing, as we move, a tool that we use called Trust Enhanced Risk Management. Now, this is a series of tools by Dr. Piotr Kafta. Does anybody know Dr. Kafta? This guy's literally written 3 books on trust, and they're he's a genius. He's awesome, but not very well known over here. When we lose control, right, our confidence has to come from the control and trust. Risk assessments typically assume that you have a lot of the answers and you have those controls are in your power or in your sphere of influence. But in reality, we have to start when we don't have control. Trust comes in, and really it's a way to quantify your trust metrics. Why do I trust a system? Do I trust a system because they're very transparent? And proprietary software, open source, which is more trustworthy? Yeah, well, OpenSSL was out there for a long time. Everybody just assumes that people are spending their spare time instead of hacking Barbies, that they're trying to trust crypto. So it does. It depends. So really, it's okay to trust. You have to in the modern world. Understand why you trust. Understand who you trust. Measure that trust decision that you made, and then come back and deal with it. I mean, we trusted RSA for a long time with our seeds, our secrets. Why did we do that? Well, because those tokens were super expensive. If you lost one, it was lost forever. Unless they could send you a 3.5-inch floppy through the U.S. Postal Service, right? That need disappeared in the future, you could actually be your own trusted authority there, but nobody developed it. So it's not just you make a trust decision is made at a point in time. You need to revisit those decisions, document them, and revisit them. And then I'm going to try to get some of these danger index tools going, so that makes it real simple, almost as fast as a rapid risk assessment. You could look at two systems, maybe count the number of independent systems within the system of systems, maybe look at how many secrets they keep, maybe find out how many effectors exist, and just, in the vehicles, I think the number of segments. Are your critical systems on the same bus as your infotainment system? And look at those. So make it very easy, because none of this is consumer friendly. If we could look at a car and say, hey, this is how much it costs you on the to drive it. Here's your mileage per gallon, and here's your safety rating. So going back to I Am the Cavalry, that 5-star safety rating from a cyber standpoint, wouldn't be great if we had some of those things, but we don't. So we need to have decision support tools. Finally, I'm almost up against it. I'll entertain some questions or some dialogue here, but I love Circle City Con. It's my second year. Hopefully I get to come back next year. We have a conference in Dayton called DayCon, and it's the sister conference for Troopers. I don't know if anybody's been to Troopers, but here's the information if you want to check us out. And anybody who wants to go and uses the discount code CCC, we'll give you a $25 discount. And this year's theme is Change the Code, Change the World. We'll be doing a lot of cool stuff. It's our 10th anniversary. Dual Cores promised to come back. So it's going to be fun. And we learn, work, and play harder in Dayton. And so in closing, don't panic. It's inevitable. So prepare accordingly. That's it. I don't have any questions. Yeah, there aren't any standards. I was in D.C. this week, and one of the people there's legislation coming, but typically it's too late and it's going to be to the far end, and very powerful lobbies. I mean, very powerful lobbies, and the idea that when the life cycle of a car is like 10 years, so patching that is very expensive because they have to bring it back. They are safe, but these new systems that have more software than hardware, so there's no regulation. They can do that. And the reason, why would they do it? I mean, assuming they understand that one system's inherently more secure than the other, what would be their motivation for putting separate buses in or not putting separate buses in? Cost. It's very expensive. And it's interesting when you go talk to, because the original connected car research, I wanted CAN bus data so that we'd look at it and be able to model cars. Manufacturers do not want to give you their CAN bus codes. Even though CAN bus is a protocol that everybody knows, the way they do their signaling, the messages, the message codes, those are all proprietary. So the modding scene that I was talking about before, that's where people have gone to figure out diagnostics. I mean, think about the ecosystem. You go to get your car fixed. You can't even fix your own car, right? So you go there to have them tell you that error, that little red light that's on, is an error code. And they look, they subscribe to that. So that's why, for $20 you can get an onboard diagnostic. It's device, and they're sketchy when they come in. The last one I got came in with a little CD-ROM and it had a whole bunch of pirated software on it, and it also had a couple pieces that were backdoored. But they did have the tables, so you can see your error code. You can find out what's wrong. That's how they make money. Car manufacturers do not make money on selling the vehicle. It's all in the maintenance afterwards, and now the services. So that's why all of them are rushing to the infotainment system piece, because they can sell subscriptions. They're not regulated in that respect, but it's inevitable. And I think, to your point, we will see I believe the first software liability, because old-timers, we've been thinking software liability, that's how we'll get security to work, right? Because somebody's going to get sued, and the industry will take care of themselves at that point. Most likely, the first software liability will be something that happens in a connected vehicle. Any more questions? All right. Well, thanks for your time. I think it's lunch, and hopefully we'll see you around later today. Cheers.